Welcome to a step-by-step guide to how to clean and slack a chain on a motorbike. Step 1. Own a motorbike. Step 2. Place the motorcycle on a rear stand or the side stand if you don't have a rear stand. Step 2.5. If your motorcycle has a center stand, do not adjust slack with it on the center stand. Chain slack must be done with the rear suspension loaded. If you adjust chain slack with the rear wheel off the ground on a center stand, when the bike sits back on the ground, it will be too tight, and that could impede your suspension travel. What you will need: some sort of cleaning product for your chain. This is brake clean. You can also use chain cleaner like in aerosol cans. It's quite an expensive way to do it. Kerosene also works. Brake cleaner is probably the most cost-effective way to do it if you buy the 5-litre jugs. Your preferred flavour of chain lubricant. I have no affiliation with Muck-Off. I've used all sorts of chain lube. I'm pretty sure it all does the same thing. A chain brush like this one, but any good stiff bristled plastic brush will be fine. Don't use a metal brush. Something to measure your chain slack with. My personal recommendation, a ruler. They're usually quite good for measuring things. A device for telling if your axle is in line. We'll get onto this later. A torque wrench for your rear axle. Again, we'll talk about this later. Some gloves, because cleaning chains is always messy work. The appropriate tools for moving your axle backwards and forwards. As an addendum, I like to check my tyre pressures while I'm in here anyway, because I'm down with the bike, so you might as well. If you have a chain guard like this, and you're using either a laser alignment device or one of these simple mechanical ones like I've got, take your chain guard off, because this is going to have to sit here. But again, we'll talk about this later. Chain slack is measured in the center of the chain off the bottom run. That's the center between the rear axle and the front drive sprocket. You don't have to get super technical about this. About the center is going to be good enough, but for the purposes of science, if we measure this very badly, we can see that the center of the rear axle is somewhere about 660. So the center is going to be about here. And that lines up quite nicely with the bottom of this swing arm protector. So it's about here on this bike. A lot of bikes will have a little sticker on the swing arm that will tell you what the slack should be. This is obviously the operating chain tension. If your bike doesn't have these stickers, you've taken them off, or maybe it's an older model, have a quick Google or look in the owner's manual, get an owner's manual if you're doing this kind of work yourself, and see what the operating chain tension should be. When measuring chain slack, I like to go from the bottom and just stick the ruler up against the swing arm and then measure the slack from the top part of the chain, so where that lines up with the ruler. I like to push it down a little bit first, not loads, just so it takes up the slack on the top run. Like that. See that tiny bit of movement? That's enough. You're not trying to push it into the floor. Then where it's sitting there, which is somewhere around 60 mil, I'm looking for 35 mil up. So that's about there. And as you can see, it's well out of slack. I can actually push that all the way into the swing arm. You don't have to be millimeter accurate with this. It's better actually to have a slightly loose chain than a slightly too tight chain. Chain slack is adjusted by moving the axle backwards or forwards in the swing arm. Before you can push the axle around with the little set screws, you will need to slacken off the axle nut. You only need to slacken it, you don't need to take it all the way off. So just loosen it off a turn or a turn and a half. It should be enough to allow you to push the axle about. This bike has little bolts which essentially are set screws with lock nuts on them. So you back these off with the appropriately sized spanner. So you unlock the lock nuts like that, and now with a 10 I can wind this bolt out to push the axle back. Note that the axle goes through the swing arm and is captive on both sides, but each side of the axle can move independently forwards or backwards in the swing arm. So it's my recommendation that you adjust the chain side first to just below spec, and then bring the other side into alignment with it. If you start adjusting willy-nilly, you'll get out of shape really quick and you'll have to push the wheel back in and start again. So once you've undone the axle nut on the other side and slackened off the locking nut, you can now go ahead and adjust the chain out. Once I've set this side, I like to lock that in to make sure it can't turn. Check my slack again on the chain side and then pull the other side in line. This is what this little device is for. It's for sighting a line down the chain to make sure that the rear axle is in line with the front drive sprocket. And you can see it's a bit difficult to show on camera, but we're just off there. So once we pull the other side back, this should come in line. My honest opinion, I've used laser aligners, I've got one, I've used the string between the wheels and all that kind of stuff. These things with the straight edge to sight a line down are still probably the quickest and easiest method for aligning a rear wheel. They're like 10 quid from Amazon. I've had this one nearly a decade. Grab one of these, they're brilliant. I'll now lock this side back off on the lock nut and then check the slack on the other side. When tensioning the lock nut, always hold the other nut as well because they can move. Also, make sure the lock nuts are tightened properly because they can back out and then this can rattle its way in. Before I button everything up and torque the axle, I'm now going to recheck my chain slack. Now we're going to get onto the argument in the comments section part. I have a torque wrench which goes up to the appropriate spec for this bike, which is about 118 to 120 Newton meters. If you don't have a torque wrench, don't worry. A long 1/2 inch ratchet or breaker bar is fine. Obviously don't reef on it until you're pulling the threads out, but good and snug is gonna be fine, especially on a rear axle. Most of these sports bikes are around 120, 130 I think. So that's a fairly decent pull on a breaker bar. Torque wrenches, interestingly, one, if you're gonna do a lot of work on your bike, it's worth getting one of these because there's a reason why a manufacturer specifies a torque. But these are also the most inaccurate way to measure torque on a threaded fixing. If you don't believe me, go and read Machinery's handbook. 1/2 inch breaker bar, appropriately sized socket, give it a good freaking pull, and if you're worried, just lock wire it. That's your fix if you're worried about your torque spec. I'll spare you the detail of cleaning a chain because you should probably know how to do that. It's cleaning something. But what I will say is put something down underneath. So I've just got a bit of old cardboard here. You can buy one of them fancy things that goes, it's a waste of money. Just put a bit of cardboard on the floor, yeah? Because this stuff that comes off the chain, all the grease and oil and whatnot, it will stain your driveway. Just know that. Once you've got your chain relatively clean, now it's time to lubricate it. We'll talk about where you're lubricating and where you're not in a second. But here's a little tip. Find the chain link where the chain is joined because it has different pins. Or if yours has got the little clip, that one. And start your lubrication there. And then once that comes back around, you know you've done the whole chain on one side. That way it saves you going round and round and round and round. So, where are you lubricating? This is a sealed O-ring chain. The only parts that therefore really need lubrication are the O-rings in here and in here. This is a sealed O-ring or X-ring chain, right? That's where you want the majority of your lubricant. It will get on everything else, which is absolutely fine, but it doesn't do that much because the grease is packed in these center rollers and the O-rings stop it from escaping and stop dirt ingressing into that, which wears your chain out. Moisture and dirt will get in there, but cleaning and lubricating your chain regularly limits it. This stuff is formulated not to attack the rubber. In a pinch, WD-40 or whatever is fine, but if you use it a lot, because WD-40 is mineral based, it can degrade the rubber quicker. That is it, your chain is lubricated. What I like to do is spin the wheel a bit and then wipe off the excess. When I wipe off the excess, I do it from here, just like that, just lightly. You don't need to take off that much, that will be fine. And to be fair, this particular brand of chain lube I find doesn't go everywhere, so it's actually alright. When I'm doing tyre pressures on a road bike, I just stick to the manufacturer recommendations. So for a single rider, which is me, it's 250, 290. Right, that's KPA, right? whatever that is in PSI, usually 3642. I know somebody's going to go in the comments, oh, it's too high. This is a road bike, so it's designed to have those tyre pressures to give you optimum tyre wear and optimum contact patch at road levels of riding. And in all my years of messing about on sports bikes on roads, I have never had a problem with stock pressures. Couple of bits of extra information about chain slacking. I mentioned earlier that it was better to have a chain that was slightly too loose than slightly too tight. The reason why is a chain that's too tight across the bottom run won't allow the suspension to go through its complete range before it pulls that bottom run of chain tight. If you hit a bump that's going to compress that suspension up, but the chain is so tight it doesn't allow the swing arm to swing through its range, that could cause you a problem. The second problem with having a chain that's too tight is it's going to pull on everything a lot more in regular riding. So while that suspension's moving, it's pulling that chain really tight, and therefore it's going to pull on the output shaft bearings that you can't see on this particular bike. But the sprocket, the front drive sprocket, is mounted directly to the output shaft of the gearbox. If this is constantly going bowstring tight every time you go over a bump, it's going to constantly keep pulling that shaft backwards against the bearings. And they'll probably be on plain roller bearings in there, which don't mind that kind of loading. They're in fact made for it, but it will wear them out sooner. Also, it will stretch your chain and wear your sprockets faster if your chain is too tight. Second little piece of information about chain slacking is chains stretch fastest when they're very new or very old. I won't tell you what the mileage is on a new and an old chain because it really depends how you're loading that chain and what you're doing with it. Also, you can tell if your chain is out of slack by how the bike rides. So if acceleration is picked up kind of snatchy and deceleration is kind of snatchy and you get that little jerk while it's picking up the slack in the chain, check your chain. If you ride a lot, you should be checking your chain tension and possibly even adjusting it every week. Also, when you're checking your chain, it's worth checking the teeth on your sprockets. This bike hasn't done that many miles, so this is fine. But if you look at the profile on the sprockets, front and rear, the front's a bit of a pain on this because you've got to take a cover off and the quick shifter and all that. If you're looking at the teeth on the chain and the sprockets here, and they're kind of hooked over and narrow, you know, kind of like shark teeth, then it's well worn out. A worn sprocket will wear a new chain quicker. Likewise, an old chain will wear a new sprocket. So chains and sprockets should be changed in one go. Now the only thing left to do is take it for a nice ride. Thanks for watching. See you next time.